Detective Laura Mitchell had seen her share of crimes, but nothing could prepare her for the smoke that consumed the Pacific Northwest. With every fire, every charred building, and every hidden clue, she realized they were not chasing a single arsonist. They were hunting a network of criminals who thrived on chaos. The small towns of the Pacific Northwest had always been quiet, framed by dense forests and misty rivers. Life moved slowly, and people trusted that danger was something they read about in newspapers, not something that appeared at their doorsteps. That peace was shattered one chilly autumn night when the first fire broke out. It started in a narrow alley behind a row of shuttered shops, smoke curling into the sky like a warning. Firefighters arrived to find flames spreading rapidly, consuming everything in their path. At first, the locals assumed it was an accident, maybe an electrical fault, perhaps a discarded cigarette, but the fire's speed and intensity suggested something far more deliberate. In the following days, similar fires erupted across neighboring towns, each one starting in different settings: an abandoned warehouse, a small forest patch near the outskirts, a single-family home left empty for the weekend. While the authorities tried to reassure the public, fear began to settle in like a heavy fog. People double-checked their locks, kept watch through curtains, and whispered about the fires in hushed tones. Each new blaze made the previous one seem like a warning, a prelude to something bigger. Detectives were called in, trying to find a connection that wasn't immediately obvious. They combed through scorched remains, looking for fingerprints, traces of accelerants, anything that could lead to a suspect. In some places, they found small hints, footprints leading away from the scene, strange chemical residues that didn't belong, patterns that suggested someone had thought carefully about how the fire would move. It became clear that these were not random acts. The fires had precision. They were methodical, almost artistic, as if the arsonist were painting with flames rather than destroying by accident. News of the fires spread rapidly, and with it, anxiety. Residents of nearby towns became hyper-aware of every flicker of light and every smell of smoke. Schools held emergency drills, and local authorities began issuing warnings about potential fire hazards. Yet, despite heightened vigilance, the fires continued. The arsonist seemed to anticipate the firefighters' every move, striking in ways that maximized chaos while minimizing immediate capture. Local law enforcement started coordinating with state and federal agencies, pooling resources and comparing notes. They mapped out every fire, every suspicious activity, and every lead, hoping to find a pattern. But the fires appeared to move in unpredictable directions, jumping from forests to residential areas and back again. Some investigators whispered that the arsonist had a deep knowledge of the region, understanding its forests, its shortcuts, and even the timing of emergency response. The idea that one person could orchestrate so much destruction was terrifying, and the thought of multiple perpetrators only added to the unease. As the weeks passed, the fires became a part of daily life. Smoke hung over the towns, settling on rooftops and fields, a constant reminder that danger was near. People avoided evening walks and late-night drives. Children stared at the blackened trees along the river, their innocence shadowed by fear. The detectives continued their work tirelessly, documenting each scene, piecing together evidence, and chasing leads that often ended in dead ends. With every fire, the stakes grew higher, and the sense of urgency pressed down on both the investigators and the communities they were sworn to protect. By the end of the first month, it was undeniable. This was no ordinary criminal. The fires were deliberate, calculated, and terrifyingly precise. The arsonist, or arsonists, were playing a game, leaving behind not just destruction, but a haunting trail of fear. The Pacific Northwest had entered a new reality, one where flames danced on the edges of townships and no one could feel truly safe. Detectives braced themselves, knowing that the next fire could reveal the first real clue, but also knowing that it could be the most dangerous yet. The detectives began to realize that the fires were more than just acts of destruction. They were messages, carefully constructed and leaving clues only the most observant could detect. Every scene was meticulously documented. Charred wood, melted metal, and scorched earth became a language that the investigators were learning to read. They noticed strange chemical residues that did not belong in typical household fires, accelerants mixed in precise ratios designed to ignite quickly and burn unpredictably. Footprints, sometimes partially obscured, suggested the arsonist was familiar with moving through forests and urban backstreets alike, leaving minimal traces behind. Each discovery brought both frustration and fascination. The methodical nature of the crimes suggested intelligence and patience, a mind that could plan weeks in advance, calculating how flames would spread and where emergency crews would respond. One forest fire revealed something chilling. Amidst the burned underbrush, the investigators discovered a hidden campsite. It had been abandoned in haste, but its arrangement was deliberate. Tools carefully stacked, remnants of clothing folded, even a small notebook with symbols that could not immediately be deciphered. The site hinted at a perpetrator who watched, waited, and studied the land like a predator tracking its prey. Investigators felt the unnerving sensation of being observed, as though the arsonist were always just out of sight, aware of every movement they made. Each fire scene carried its own signature. The investigators began referring to it as the artist's mark. Some fires started in areas that would maximize visibility from afar, the glow of flames a signal to someone, somewhere. Others burned in near-perfect isolation, designed to spread without interruption. It was a calculated balance between chaos and control. The team theorized that these fires were not random, that someone had a larger plan unfolding across the Pacific Northwest. Maps were pinned to walls, routes traced with string, and patterns studied from aerial photographs. It became clear that the arsonist had intimate knowledge of the land, understanding not just the geography, but the habits of the people who lived there. With each discovery came fear. Local residents became more vigilant, locking doors and reporting anything unusual, but the fires continued to appear in places where they were least expected. The unpredictability of the attacks created a psychological strain. Families avoided walking alone at night. Towns organized neighborhood watches, and even firefighters grew cautious, aware that a single misstep could allow the arsonist to strike again. Despite tireless efforts, tangible leads were scarce. Surveillance cameras caught fleeting shadows, tire tracks were partial or washed away by rain, and anonymous tips often led to dead ends. Investigators realized they were chasing someone who not only understood fire, but also understood human behavior, exploiting it to stay ahead. The combination of strategy and unpredictability made the arsonist both terrifying and elusive. As the investigation deepened, detectives grew increasingly aware that the fires were more than physical destruction. They were psychological attacks, designed to instill fear and uncertainty. The towns were being tested, and the investigators themselves felt the pressure of knowing that each fire was a challenge, a taunt, and a puzzle wrapped in smoke. With every charred scene, the mystery deepened, and the hunt for the arsonist became not just a matter of justice, but a race against time, fire, and fear itself. As the detectives reviewed maps and incident reports, a pattern slowly emerged, one that was invisible to anyone looking at the fires individually. When they connected the locations, plotting them across towns, highways, rivers, and forest trails, a network began to appear, faint but undeniable. Fires that had seemed random were linked by lines only detectable through careful analysis. The realization struck hard. The arsonist, or perhaps arsonists, were not acting impulsively. They were planning, coordinating, and exploiting their knowledge of the region to remain invisible. Investigators began to consider that this was the work of more than one individual. The sheer volume of fires and the speed at which they appeared made it difficult for a single person to strike with such consistency. Perhaps it was a small group, operating with precision, each member responsible for a specific region or type of target. Some fires were set near forests, others near abandoned buildings, and still others in residential zones, all requiring different approaches and careful timing. The idea of a coordinated operation sent a shiver through the investigative team. Surveillance became crucial. Detectives deployed cameras along suspected routes, noting vehicles that moved suspiciously at odd hours. Sometimes fleeting glimpses were captured, a dark SUV moving along a forest road just before a fire ignited, or a figure crouched near a field with something glinting in the pale moonlight. Yet, despite these partial sightings, the arsonists always seemed a step ahead. License plates were obscured, masks were worn, and escape routes were meticulously planned. Each new fire seemed to serve a dual purpose, destruction and diversion, pulling attention away from the next target. The team also noticed another disturbing trend. Certain fires occurred near wildlife preserves, delicate ecosystems, or areas known for rare plants. At first, this seemed coincidental, but the repetition was undeniable. Someone was not only interested in the chaos caused to towns and forests, they were crafting an intricate message, perhaps a demonstration of power, precision, or obsession. The arsonists were orchestrating not just destruction, but an exhibition of control over both nature and human response. Investigators pored over aerial photographs, weather reports, and emergency response logs. By analyzing wind patterns, road access, and fire behavior, they attempted to predict where the next blaze might occur. The network of locations was terrifying in its complexity. Fires were spaced to allow for maximum spread without overlap, leaving investigators scrambling to cover multiple threats simultaneously. It was a game of strategy in which the detectives were perpetually behind. Despite growing frustration, there was also fascination. The intelligence behind the attacks became impossible to ignore. Each fire was almost a puzzle, testing the team's ability to anticipate human and natural variables alike. It became clear that these arsonists were not mere vandals or thrill-seekers. They were planners, tacticians, and observers, capable of predicting the reactions of law enforcement and civilians alike. As the days turned into weeks, the weight of the investigation pressed heavily on the detectives. They were no longer simply fighting fire. They were unraveling a network of intent and precision that reached deeper than anyone had imagined. Each discovery revealed the scope of the operation, and each new fire reinforced a single, terrifying truth. This network was organized, intelligent, and relentless, and catching it would require more than skill. It would demand understanding a mind, or minds, that thrived in smoke and chaos. Detectives pushed forward. Knowing that the arsonists were no longer simply destroying property, they were playing a dangerous game with lives. Each fire became more daring, striking closer to populated areas and critical infrastructure. One night, an emergency call led investigators to a remote cabin nestled deep in the woods. By the time they arrived, the structure was nearly consumed, smoke curling into the sky like a warning. Hidden cameras later revealed fleeting shadows moving through the smoke, their movements precise and deliberate. The arsonists had been there just minutes before, leaving behind nothing that could directly identify them. The team realized that this was no longer a chase for evidence. It was a race to anticipate the criminals' next move. The fires began to take on a pattern that unsettled even the most seasoned investigators. Some burned through residential areas with surgical precision, while others appeared near endangered wildlife habitats, destroying delicate ecosystems in ways that seemed almost symbolic. It was as if the arsonists were leaving a message, one that only someone paying close attention could interpret. Each new blaze tested the detectives' ability to read the clues hidden within the chaos. They realized that the fires were carefully timed and placed to create maximum fear while avoiding immediate capture, demonstrating an understanding of both human and environmental behavior. Surveillance and stakeouts became exhausting routines. Detectives spent long nights parked in forests, along back roads, and near abandoned buildings, hoping to catch a glimpse of the perpetrators. They tracked unusual vehicle movements, noting cars that traveled under the cover of darkness, sometimes returning along the same route hours later. Yet, each stakeout ended in frustration, with the arsonists vanishing as if into thin air. Investigators grew increasingly paranoid, suspecting that every shadow could be a threat and every passing vehicle a potential criminal. In addition to the psychological strain, the team faced real danger. One fire spread faster than predicted, fueled by dry underbrush and high winds, forcing them to retreat from the edge of the blaze. Another night, a small, controlled fire near a riverbank exploded unpredictably, sending embers onto nearby trees and forcing an urgent evacuation. These close calls reminded everyone that the arsonists were not only clever, they were reckless, willing to risk lives to maintain control and terror. The detectives felt the pressure mounting. Each mistake or miscalculation could have catastrophic consequences. A shocking discovery added a new layer of complexity. While examining the pattern of fires, an investigator realized that several were set in locations significant to local history: old schools, abandoned mills, and culturally important landmarks. The arsonists were not only creating fear and destruction, they were crafting a deliberate narrative, tying their attacks to symbolism and perhaps personal obsession. The realization sent chills through the team. This was not random violence. It was calculated, meaningful, and terrifyingly deliberate. The towns lived in constant tension. Residents avoided late-night travel, schools adjusted schedules, and local authorities implemented stricter safety measures. Every flicker of light, every wisp of smoke became a cause for alarm. The arsonists had succeeded in turning ordinary life into a tense, anxious game of survival, where no one felt safe and no place was truly secure. Detectives understood that the key to stopping them lay not just in tracking their movements, but in decoding the intent behind each fire. The stakes had never been higher, and one wrong assumption could mean another blaze, another tragedy, another piece of smoke rising against the night sky. Months of investigation had brought the detectives closer than ever to the arsonists, yet the final breakthrough remained elusive. The fires continued, but a careful analysis of their locations and timing finally revealed a startling clue. A warehouse on the outskirts of a small town, previously overlooked, appeared at the center of the network. Its location matched the midpoint between several past fires, and aerial images suggested occasional activity late at night. The detectives coordinated a careful search, preparing for what could be the most significant discovery yet. Inside the abandoned warehouse, the scene was both chaotic and methodical. Burned remnants of previous experiments, stacks of maps, notebooks filled with meticulous notes, and even photographs of investigators themselves littered the space. The detectives realized that the arsonists had been observing them as closely as they had been chasing the fires. The sense of being watched was no longer abstract. It was real, tangible, and frightening. The evidence revealed a carefully planned operation that extended far beyond what the team had imagined. The most shocking revelation came when the notebooks were decoded. The arsonists were not a single person, but a group, connected through secret online forums and shared obsessions. Each member had a role. Some planned the locations and timing, others gathered materials, and a few executed the fires with precision. The group had bonded over their fascination with fire, chaos, and the thrill of outsmarting the authorities. Their coordination and intelligence explained how they had evaded capture for so long. Detectives felt both relief and dread. The mastermind was no longer a shadowy figure, but a real network of people, each capable of immense destruction. Arrests were made swiftly, yet some members had vanished before authorities could reach them. The remaining individuals provided partial confessions, revealing disturbing details about the planning and symbolism behind each fire. They admitted that certain locations were chosen to create maximum psychological impact, striking fear into residents while demonstrating control over both people and the environment. The arsonists' obsession had grown beyond destruction. It had become a statement, a twisted form of art that merged chaos, strategy, and message. Even with arrests, the Pacific Northwest bore the scars of the fires. Blackened forests, destroyed homes, and charred landscapes served as haunting reminders of the terror that had gripped the towns. Residents slowly returned to daily life, but a sense of unease lingered. The psychological impact of the arsonists' campaign could not be undone. Every smoky horizon, every flicker of flame reminded people that for a time, control had belonged to those who thrived in fire and chaos. Detectives reflected on the case with a mix of pride and exhaustion. They had unraveled an elaborate network, captured some of its members, and prevented further destruction. Yet the investigation had left a permanent mark on their minds, the knowledge that some members had escaped, that chaos could arise anywhere, and that ordinary life could be disrupted in the blink of an incendiary device. Smoke had claimed more than property. It had claimed a sense of safety, forever changing the way the communities viewed their world. The final lesson of the arsonists' campaign was stark. Intelligence, coordination, and obsession could make destruction almost untouchable. The fires had been extinguished, but the memory of them and the cunning behind them lingered in every shadow, every ember, and every quiet night in the Pacific Northwest. The arsonists were no longer just criminals. They were a haunting reminder of how calculated chaos can ripple through life, leaving scars that last long after the smoke has cleared.